So many weapons, so little time. Hello everybody, welcome to another episode of Mount&Blade Ultimate Guide, where today we're going to talk about weapon stats, specifically different damage types, weapon speeds, and also weapon reach, and I'm going to tell you what they mean in actual combat. So now we're going to talk about damage types. There are three different types of damage type. If you see on this weapon, there's two right there. One is cut and one is pierce. The other weapon damage type is blunt. So all three of these damage types have a certain amount of damage and a certain amount of armor penetration, cut having the lowest, blunt having the next lowest, and of course piercing doing the most piercing damage to a piece of armor. Usually the cut stat on a weapon is higher than the piercing stat or the blunt stat if it has those two if it has more than one stat. And in combat, you'll actually realize that sometimes the piercing stat may be better to use, and sometimes the cut stat may be better used, depending on how much armor your opponent has. What you see here is the cut stat being used. Even though this weapon has 48 cut, it took me 3 shots to kill that man. If it had piercing, like this weapon, I one-shotted that armor person because my weapon has piercing and it pierced through the armor. All bows and arrows and some throwing weapons also have the stat piercing. And this piercing stat lets you penetrate enemy armor and easily fight them. Here I'm using a blunt weapon. Blunt has a certain amount of armor penetration more than cut, but less than piercing. It's very easy to use, and also if you take notice, if I use a blunt weapon, you might already know this already, you get prisoners, in which you can capture into your army and later either recruit them or sell them. The next thing we're going to talk about is weapon reach. Weapon reach is a very interesting thing because sometimes it's better to have a long weapon, and sometimes it's better to have a short weapon. A long weapon lets you hit your opponent first, get that first shot in, keep them at bay, and also it's easier to swing a long weapon on a horse. However, a short weapon is better sometimes in close quarters combat because a short weapon is shorter and you won't randomly hit it on a wall or something like that. See here, I'm using a long weapon and I keep hitting it against the man and I can't do any damage. If I had a short weapon such as this warhammer, I could do a lot more damage a lot faster, and that sometimes is better. So let's talk about weapon speed. Weapon speed is actually very important in foot combat and sometimes horse combat. After the initial strike from your weapon range, that first strike that I talked about, your weapon speed is very important because it determines how many times you can hit your opponent. If you have similar weapon speeds, then it all depends on your skill as a player. But if you have a faster weapon speed, you can just spam the attack button and keep hitting your opponent even though they might be better than you. If you have a slow weapon speed, your opponent can barrage you with attacks, and you don't have anything to block them, and you don't have any ability to retaliate. Also, a faster weapon speed lets you retaliate better after making a mistake, which is always good. That's it for another episode of Mount&Blade Ultimate Guide. Thank you for watching, and remember, rate, comment, subscribe.